Hey guys, welcome back. In today's video, we are taking a look at the price fixing on AMC, the short liquidity issues, how shares are being forced to close, and many more in this video. First, we're taking a look at this. AMC is starting off with 65% of volume being routed off exchange. So once again, we're taking a look at the update on AMC's dark pool usage. And we're taking a look here, 65% off exchange, NYSE coming in at second, but only at 9.32, with SIBO, which once again, 7.36. And so we can know by now that every single day we are faced with manipulation and suppression. And you can see that AMC moved 0% today. And this is already a very strong indication for the investors, because despite the fact they're hiding our buy orders, we are still not giving up to these short sellers, and they don't have that control to continuously bring AMC down. If we take a look at yesterday's, you can see manipulation can't stop us, where we saw the total volume at 9.4, the dark pools was 6 million with 63% being hidden, NYSE at 12.6, but yet despite all that, AMC still closed 3.38%. And so we can see that there have been days where even though they're trying to suppress AMC, they're trying to hide all the buy orders, we are still able to power through. And so this is what we've said with how we're seeing these short sellers to slowly run out of the ability to continuously push AMC down, to continuously suppress where AMC should be. And slowly we're letting that real price discovery come in. Now, again, the emphasis here is slowly, because AMC price should be way higher than where we are right now, but we of course are always faced with constant suppression, which we'll talk about all the time in these videos. And so this is something that we have to understand. Another thing to note is that they are obviously doing this from the very start. You can see that this was taken at 11 a.m. So just quickly after the market has only started for an hour. And this is what we're already faced with in terms of, they know that the volume is obviously coming in at the start of the market. They know that typically it's obviously the start of the market and you have a burst at the end of the market. And so they are not just using dark pool at one period of time. They're not using it at one particular set of, whether it's 1 p.m., 2 p.m., 1 a.m., or sorry, 12 p.m., etc., but they are obviously trying to do it throughout the whole day. So throughout the whole day, they're constantly trying to steal the pressure away from AMC. They're trying to steal the buy orders. And this is what we've said with just how worried the short sellers are of the real price discovery at AMC, and hence why they continuously try to do this. And another thing is, you can see 3 hours of trading AMC at 290 to 291. Price fixing is illegal by all means, but the SEC is sleeping at the wheel. The barcode trading should have been investigated since the day of its inception with Ape. And so we can obviously see the price action on AMC, the constant barcoding. And now we've said this. In the past, this has already happened multiple times. And now typically, barcoding happens on a stock where you're not seeing much volume, you're not seeing much liquidity happening. And what we're seeing for AMC is that it's clearly not the case. And what we then are seeing is, you can understand, price fixing is when competitors agree to set prices at a certain level instead of letting supply and demand determine them. And so we have always known that supply and demand, whilst it should dictate where a price of a particular stock should go, it has never been the case for AMC. The demand has always been great, the supply has always been low. However, they have obviously inflated it by creating billions of synthetics. But even then, they are still trying to fix the price and not letting the supply and demand actually setting the price naturally. And so this is why we've known that AMC is obviously met with price fixing, and it's why we constantly see it barcode. Now, like I said, you tend to see this on a stock with very, very low liquidity. Now, we've talked about AMC has low liquidity in the sense that it doesn't have that many shares being sold by the apes ourselves. However, it has plenty of shares being created and sold by these institutions who have obviously rehypothecated these shares. And so whilst it does have low liquidity within the apes because they're not willing to sell their shares, it doesn't have too much illiquidity because the institutions are constantly creating synthetics. And so despite that, if we're still seeing barcoding, it really lets you understand what is happening in the market. Now, furthermore, so on the subject of illiquidity, now we talked about this. Apes aren't willing to sell their shares. So if certain institutions want to accumulate big amounts of shares, they aren't able to do so, especially if they want to buy the real shares of apes, especially if they don't want to force other institutions to create a bulk of shares at once. However, what we can then see from him is the option chain for AMC shows someone is selling 1,598, so this 159,000 worth of $3 calls for $5. Meaning if they sold those calls, they could buy back the position almost 2 times with the money. Why buy these calls when you can buy shares for $3? Now, firstly, we have to understand that this is just on the chain. This is something that has not yet been executed. So whilst there are, of course, these calls on the market, no one has actually bought these calls. It has just been listed on the market. But secondly, it obviously calls for the questions, why is someone doing this? Are they trying to help certain institutions out? Because like we've said, if institutions want to buy large amount of AMC shares, they aren't able to do that very easily because apes aren't willing to actually sell their shares. And what they've typically done in the past is that they buy it off of other institutions through OTC, is what we've talked about. Now, in this case, if there are investors, if there are even more importantly, short sellers who are in need of shares, who want shares of AMC, and they have to, whether it's to cover, whether it's to just accumulate, and they are not able to get out $3 because they know that, and we've seen it, how institutions trade with other institutions at a way higher price, is why we've seen the price leaks in the past before. If that is the case, if we are seeing short sellers who are desperately in need of AMC shares, then it would make sense for why they would want to buy these calls for $5 because they aren't able to actually buy and cover at $3, hence why they need to buy these calls. Now, these of course are all just assumptions. We have yet to see these calls being bought, so they're still up on the market, and so that's why we've said this is only an assumption. Until we see these calls being bought by certain institutions, you know, we don't actually know what's going on. It may just be that someone is trying to potentially captivate a opportunity, trying to, you know, just to create something or whatever it is, they've done this. But once again, right now, because it hasn't gone through, this is just something that we should just keep our eye on, but of course realize it hasn't yet to happen. And then we're seeing this, and this is what's creating panic for the market right now. This is why we're now seeing shares being forced to close. So we talked about Genius Group for a very long time because of what they're doing, because of the stand that they're taking, obviously trying to fight back naked short selling. They're trying to put, of course, the lawsuit. We've seen them collect data, and you can even see it seems like Genius Group is gathering this data by short seller manipulators every day until the lawsuit. And so right now it is very, very likely for us to assume that Genius Group has access to a large pool of data which contains what these naked short sellers have been doing. So things like how they're doing it, things like how many naked short shares they have, things like how they're creating synthetics, etc., etc. And so this, if they are all collected and they're going to present it in the lawsuit, it's going to create big problems. And we're already seeing how these broker institutions are trying to prepare for this and trying to potentially get rid of the data or to not be affected by the data. Because firstly, what we're seeing is, you can see from Korea Investment and Securities, please inform that system change related to the rights of GameStop option is scheduled for October the 3rd. To facilitate the system maintenance, training for this stock will be unavailable starting for September 30th. Additionally, if you hold the stock listed below, a forced liquidation will be conducted. So the stock is GME and you will be forced liquidated. And once again, these are for the Korea Investment and Securities. Now, the reason why this is very, very important and why it's interesting is because for those of you who know, Korea, especially for their markets, they have been very, very vocal on naked short selling. We've seen them fine multiple institutions. We've seen them fine multiple banks. So whether it's hedge funds, whether it's banks, when they've done naked short selling, when they abused and exploited naked short selling tactics and used that on a stock, we've seen the regulations actually deal with consequences and stop it from happening. We've seen them take a very, very, firm stand on against naked short selling. And now they're trying to force liquidate anyone who holds shares of GME, especially when we know everything that's going on with GME. You can see Stockbroker dealer Korea Investment and Securities, which is the subsidiary of BNP Paribas, just told clients they will be forced liquidated out of GME options. Now, this is why it's very important because of things that it can do. So if we're seeing in Korea they're doing this, what it could actually do is, firstly, the shorts are locked out during volatility. So if we were to see volatility, then shorts can't hedge, they're forced to cover later at brutal prices. The synthetics and naked shorts will be exposed, especially when you're in a country that takes a very firm stand on naked short selling, the collateral crunch, the regulatory trail, and many, many more. So what we could be likely to see is, with this forced close done in Korea, we could be seeing multiple firms being affected and actually seeing a margin call. Now, as always, none of this is ever financial advice, so do take our Telegram if someone wishes to do own due diligence and research, and I'll catch you guys next time.